and I wish somebody had told me this earlier, be bold, be brave, do it. Don't let anyone tell you that it's wrong or that it's silly or anything like that. This is your dream. This is what you want to write. Write about it. And it goes back to what, this accountant had told me. He says, "Man, look, we always feel we're not up to it, or we're not talented enough, or we're not." No, anything can be learned. That's fine. Practice makes perfect. It's as simple as that. And when I started out, I worked with, I would copy styles of like King and all that just to get the rhythm going until I discovered my own. And you will. It's not impossible.
Hi friends, this is Read and Write with Natasha podcast. My name is Natasha Tynes and I'm an author and a journalist. In this channel, I talk about the writing life, review books, and interview authors. Hope you enjoy the journey. Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of Read and Write with Natasha. Today I have with me author Ryan Winter, who's a French Cajun author based in Louisiana. His recently published novel, Wake the Devil, is historical fiction based upon the story of the grisly Axeman murders of 1918 in New Orleans. Wow. So, Ryan, how are you doing? Thank you for joining me today.
I'm great. Thanks for having me, Natasha. Glad to be here.
Yeah, of course. So you're French Cajun. What is that exactly? If you can tell us. I'm not familiar with French Cajun, so maybe we can start with this. Yeah.
It's funny because when I travel different places and I guess I don't think about it because I'm from here and everybody around me knows it, in South Louisiana it's sort of a little bubble culture here. And I go and I mention something about our food, which is famous, gumbo and jambalaya. And they're like, "Wait, what?" And I'm thinking, "Oh, yeah. It's like thinking, it's just a normal thing for me." But it's basically, historically, the historic answer for that is they're Canadian rebels back in the late 1700s that escaped Canada, French Canadians that escaped Canada when, British came over and invaded Canada, and they basically got kicked out. And they went as far as they could, coming around the United States, around Florida, and wound up in Louisiana, of all places, and the Gulf Coast around the area. So it's not technically, it's centralized in South Louisiana, but you can find some in, Mississippi and Texas. But essentially, it's basically rebellious French Canadians that were thrown out and settled here in the swamps of Louisiana and kind of made a life and culture for itself. So,
Interesting.
Oh, yeah. It usually gets confused with Creoles because people think, New Orleans must be Cajun, and it's really not. And, Creole is a little bit of a different mix. It's sort of like Indian and Spanish. It's sort of like African and French. It's a very big mix of stuff, whereas Cajun's just basically French Canadian. So very slight differences in the food. You can tell if you go into the city and you come down to the Delta. It's a little different, but.
Cool. Yeah, I need to visit soon. So how did your background influence your writing, being from this background, this unique background?
Oh, it's funny because, I guess as a kid, you don't think about it. And being in Louisiana has a very colorful history. I took a couple of courses throughout school where we take it in high school, and you're allowed to take it in college, of course, which I did. And you really start to, I guess, appreciate your history when you're older.
Yeah.
When a kid, you don't really, pay attention so much. And you go, gosh, man, we really come from an interesting place with stories of piracy and vagrants and murder and voodoo and all these really things that you don't really think about until you really get older and start looking at it. And I have 3 radically different books, but they all have that one thing in common, is that they're centered around New Orleans and South Louisiana, where I'm from. And I come from a very tight knit family. Everybody lived near each other. And so a lot of those guys, they really, they're very colorful. They love to laugh real loud. They love to eat. They love to drink. It's just, real fun environment to grow up in. So I think, the fact that I do horror that's a whole nother thing altogether. But, I definitely have a support system, to be as freaky as possible, I guess, when you're writing.
I love it. So Ryan, so you identify as a horror author, right? I mean, that's like your main genre.
I can work with that. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So, what is horror in fiction? Define horror. Is it Stephen King horror, like, or does it go beyond that? I mean, how do you define horror in fiction or in
I
literature?
think, of all the genres, I think it's the one that really tells you how vulnerable we are as a person, as a human, and how that can be
Okay.
taken away so quickly. I think to me, generally, that's what horror is. It's the fear, like, oh my God, I can be alive one minute and then gone the next.
Okay.
And there's so many different types of subgenres over the years.
Yeah.
And it's my two books that I have being they're horror, but one of them is sort of a dark fantasy erotica, and the other one is a true crime paranormal. So you can go in different genres, but they all say the same thing. Like at any moment, it's all over, and that to me, that's scary, you know.
So, what's the difference between like a murder mystery and horror? Do they cross genre? Because when you read a murder mystery book, it's people die. It's terrifying, but
Mhm.
it still has a different genre. Like you would put it on the shelf as horror, and this one is like crime or murder mystery. So, what is the difference in your opinion?
I think in a lot of horror books, there's a lot of fantastical elements that are added. I think in crime and fiction, we're looking at, people against people. And I think in horror, you can kind of extend that to, the boogeyman and the creepy crawlies in the dark. And it lends to a different fantasy that's just fiction, period. There are no vampires and all that, but we can create that and use those elements mixed with the realism that we see every day as people, knowing that those things can kill us too if they were real. I think that's really, for me, that's the main difference, and I love that about horror ever since I was a kid. And I feel like it found me, honestly. I always love the spooky stuff. I love the ghost stuff. And being from New Orleans, I mean, you hear about it all the time. I mean, it's a very haunted city.
True.
And, in Cajun folklore, in the area where I'm at now, which is about an hour south of New Orleans, I'm not too far from it. It's we have our own folklore, the Cajun werewolf, and the sort of the granny that steals children in the night if you're bad. So, and again, folklore, it's never been proven, but it's still scary nevertheless. So, you kind of grow up with all these elements and you start to really see, like, wow, horror has a very wide field.
Huh. So, who influenced you when you're growing up reading? Who was your main influence?
Natasha, and I have a great my short-term memory is terrible, but my long-term memory is pretty good. I can remember as a kid, and I'm talking 2, 3 years old, my first movie that I can remember watching was a horror film, and it was called Creepshow, which is based
Okay.
off Stephen King stories. And I think it kind of snowballed from there as I got older and realized, like, wow, this is the guy who also wrote this other horror film I saw. And I'm like, wow, he has this gamut of all these great books and all that. So I think a lot of horror writers, especially new ones like me, and really give credit to him because he really did open the field for a mainstream audience. Before that, it was sort of like Dracula and Frankenstein and Shirley Hill and House on Haunted Hill and Shirley Jackson, I'm sorry, with House on Haunted Hill. And so, but then he said, now it can be, the thing in the drain in your bathtub, and he sort of opened it up to a different kind of way of looking at horror. And so he was absolutely influential growing up because, one, he was also everywhere. I mean, there wasn't a year where there wasn't a King movie or a book coming out. So he produced so much. So he was there. And eventually I discovered people like Anne Rice, who I found out was from New Orleans as well. And, she's very famous for
Is
Interview with
she?
the Vampire.
Really?
I love it. I love Anne Rice.
The
She's
vampire, yeah.
very, very different from King. King is, he's very casual writer, whereas I think Anne Rice is a little more philosophical. She kind of goes back to the old dark house, dark castle type thing. And so her writing's a little different, but no less interesting. And she was the other one I recognized. And I think that's where it really broadened my mind, like, wow, there are all these different types and they don't write the same and they don't write the same subjects, things like that. So I think those two, of all of them, and of course I watched horror films when I was a kid, movies of Wes Craven. I love Wes Craven, John Carpenter. So I grew up in the 80s. I was born in the 70s. I'm a 70s baby, but my childhood belonged to the 80s.
Same here.
Oh yeah, but it was the most interesting time to grow up. You had some of the most creative
Yeah,
movies, and so so it
yeah.
was a lot of influences. But I definitely have to say, King is like my literary godfather. I think he's taught me more about writing than any of them. So yeah.
What about like new contemporary authors these days that you're reading? Was it his name? Sugar Riley? Is he horror? Or like who are these new authors now up and coming that maybe Stephen King's son,
He's oh yeah, I like it. Yeah,
Joe
yeah,
Hill
Joe
as
Hill's
well?
great.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah,
It
yeah. Anyone else? Yeah.
the last book I read that was really good, it was called Sorrowland by River Solomon. And that was a good book. There's so many different types because now with the onset of self-publishing, so many more writers have come through. And I love that. I absolutely love that. I'm one of them, because I mean that heard of, in our time. They didn't have internet and self-publishing was kind of like a man, nobody's doing that. It's very rudimentary and all that. So there's a lot of great authors right now. There's no one in particular I can think of that because I've been reading so many different types, and there's a lot of debuts that have come out in the last few years. I think I've read more of those than anything. It's like all these debut novels, one, back and forth. So, there's a lot to look out for. I'm really curious to see how it's all going to turn out.
So they usually like horror and erotica, they kind of go hand in hand these days. I've seen them lumped together. Do you know what's the relationship? Like erotica is a a well respected genre, and it's doing really well these days, especially. So why do they put them together? I'm just curious.
I think in erotica in America, especially, it seems when it comes to sex, there's so many things that we still consider taboo. And I'm sure people in Europe and all that are like leagues ahead of us. They've been doing this for decades.
Yeah,
We still have this sort of like held back.
conservative.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and it's and I think that really needs to
yeah.
break out and to mix horror and to those two genres in particular. It's almost like, oh no, no, it's almost yeah, I will. To me, it's almost like there is and this is going to be really strange, I'm sure, but for me, horror and sex seem to go together because there's a weird erotic element about being scared. I always thought so, and it's again something I realized later on as a kid. Like it's almost like getting off, to get that next scare.
Mm,
And I think, yeah, and I think that's what it is. It's almost the same. I think the same euphoric feeling
okay.
being in sex, doing, having sex and watching horror films. It's that, I guess, that thrill, and to see them together, it just makes it more interesting. It almost makes sense, and I certainly didn't mean to do them together. It was not something I ever planned to do, but, people like Anne Rice, who was very good at doing things like that, mixing those taboos, and she mixed religion with horror. And, I really
Hmm.
loved her. I think she's very underrated as far as pushing what was big no, especially in the 70s, the 70s and 80s, when just
Oh,
AIDS and all this came out and all that. So it was kind of scary, and I think that's also what it's tied to, the scariness of it, what can come of it. So many things can come of the act of, having sex and things like that. So that's, yeah, it's there's a lot there.
interesting. Yeah, that's an interesting way of looking at it. So let's talk publishing. You mentioned something which is now horror, fantasy, and erotica. They're doing really well, self-publishing or Kindle Unlimited, and why is that? And how did you go about publishing your stuff?
In the beginning, the first book I did, it was traditionally published through Pelican Publishing, which is a very popular and lucrative company in the region in New Orleans. They published children's books for years and all that. And while
What was the first book, if you can tell the audience? What was the first book? Yeah.
it was a children's picture book, believe it or not, it was called New Orleans Mother Goose. And as a horror writer, I collect. Well, just as a reader, as a fiction reader, I collect a variety of books. I have Roald Dahl next to Clive Barker, and Dr. Seuss next to Anais Nin, who wrote it was a diarist and wrote erotica. So, and my fans, my friends would always laugh at me like, this is the weirdest shelf of books. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, how does somebody who reads erotica reads Dr. Seuss? But I'm like, it's all fiction. It's all, it's all the same. It's to me, it's all, fun. And I it kind of started as a dare where people said, well, I don't think the discussion got toward, well, I don't think horror writers can do children's books. And of course they can. I'm just like, Roald Dahl's a great example. He wrote Willy Wonka, but then he also wrote horror fiction and erotica. He wrote cookbooks. This man can do everything.
Yeah.
And even Clive Barker, who wrote did the Hellraiser movies and wrote these great books over different genres. He wrote great kids books. So I took that as a dare, and I wound up trying to figure out what I would write as a children's author. And I was coming up with ideas. I said, maybe I could do nursery rhymes. I mean, the basics of all our childhood starts with nursery rhymes. And so I said, well, if I can do some nursery rhymes, I think that would be kind of cool. So basically, I was walking around the French Quarter. I was living in downtown New Orleans. I was living in the French Quarter. And, I would go around and sort of look at all the iconology. And I kept applying it to the rhymes. And I kept saying, I was changing the lyrics to, nursery rhymes, instead of Little Miss Muffet sat on a tuffet, I kept thinking, Little Cher Meunier sat on her derriere, and started thinking of these crazy little rhymes. And I was killing myself laughing.
Yeah.
And of course, I always have a pen on me. I'm a writer. You always got to have a pen on you. And I had this and was sneaking into all the little bars as I was going, trying to steal napkins so I can write these rhymes down. So by the end of the day, I had a pocket full of napkins, and I said, "Oh, well, here it is." I threw it down to one of my friends. I said, "Look at this. This is going to be my next, book." And they were, "What?" And I'm like, "Oh yeah, oh yeah." And sure enough, it got published. Much to my amusement and relief, thank God. But it was never something I was meant to do.
Did you find an agent?
No. I turned it in just as was. If anything, I'm looking now because it was never meant to be that way. Like I said, at that time too, I was also working in film in New Orleans, so that was also a writing avenue I was trying to go more toward. So it kind of fell in my lap in a weird way. Yeah, and
I see.
Yeah, it was a very strange ride, and eventually I pieced together Wake the Devil, which would have been my first book. It's actually a rewrite that I republished. The original idea was supposed to be a script as well, and this was back in 2004, and so it's probably like my oldest work of the three. And I shopped it around, and it was like year after year after year, and I'm like, okay, I can't. I'm going to be 80 by the time this damn thing comes out. So
I know the feeling.
It's nuts. So I'm like, man, look. I mean, I'm not trying to make this some big crazy presentation. I just want this book published. I was very excited about it. It's a great story. I'm like, come on. And when you have all your people that read your things, like I said, I have a great fan base with friends, family, and all that. And they're all like, oh, when's this next story going to come out? I guess I got tired of hearing, when's this going to come out? I'm like, I don't know. So, when a friend of mine from, a fellow author, I was doing signings for New Orleans Mother Goose out throughout Louisiana. I would go to schools and talk and all that. And I had a good time doing it. And, a lot of them, we'd get on the subject of publishing. And they said, well, try self-publishing this time. And I never gave it a chance. I never thought about it. I said, well, it's kind of like a cop-out, isn't it? No. If you really want to see your book out there, you have control of it. But, I hired an editor, I hired someone to do the cover and all that. And, and that's something you have to do, which I learned as I went, and, I tried to send the book out, and it was very long, it was well over 130,000 words. And they kept wanting to cut it back. And I said, why are you cutting so much? And I kept getting bombarded with this rule that because I was new, it had to be under certain words. And to me, that's so unfair. I mean, I get it if it's excessively long and you're just talking. I get that. But, especially when it was essential and they were cutting out these great scenes I really loved. And I'm like, hold on, it's you're messing with the story. And when they were, a couple of publishers wanted to get rid of, 100,000 words. I'm like, are you crazy? Like, there's no way. I think that's when I got frustrated and decided to do self-publishing, and Ravish the same way. And I think I was just because I was in that mood where it's like, okay, that's it. I'm self-publishing. It's something I want to kind of get away from, because I find, you're doing all the marketing, you're doing all, dealing with the editors and all that. I always felt I didn't have time to write. I was constantly working the back end of producing a book, and that's not something I really wanted to do. I don't come from a marketing background. I don't really know about those things. I mean, in the '80s, we didn't have any of that. We were my favorite authors didn't deal with any of that, so I had no clue. I had no clue this was what it was going to be. And Natasha, it changes every year, so you never know what the process is going to be next year. You know,
Yeah, yeah.
I guess I'm just
Yeah, now we have TikTok. Like everyone is marketing on TikTok. A few
crazy.
years ago, there was no
Yeah,
TikTok. Yeah, I
14,
know.
15 year old.
Now, like the author marketing place, you go to Bars and Novel, and then you find like TikTok corners where they like highlight book
That's
talks.
crazy. Yeah.
It is crazy. So, how did you publish? Did you use Amazon, KDP, or how did you do the self publishing?
The first one was Vanity Press, and I know what they say about it, and I knew the story behind it and how it works and all that. But I went through Lulu Press, and they were very kind to me. But in the process of doing all that, you're dumping so much money into it, and there's just no guarantees
Yeah,
here. And I was working to make ends meet, so all this money was going to this book that just wasn't going anywhere. And again, I don't know where to mark. I don't have a background in book marketing and selling. I'll go out there and I'll sell them. I love it. I love talking to people and all that. But I mean, as far as like the bare bones of marketing in general and trying to find its niche and things like that in the internet, again, it was always evolving. It was always something new. One minute it was, oh, do it on Facebook. Now it's like, do it on Instagram. Oh, now do it on TikTok. I'm like, you can't keep, I got like a
yeah.
thousand apps on my
It's too
phone.
much.
Yeah. Yeah. And
It's too much. Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
looking toward now, especially for the next few that I'm writing, to go more traditional route. It's just what I know, and I feel it's better, because I think a lot of people self-publish because they just want that book out. They have this they wrote in 11, they just want it out, make a couple bucks, and then that's it. But I want to go further with it. For me,
Okay, okay. But what I've been reading is self-published, especially on Kindle, especially erotica, fantasy. They're doing actually a lot of money because they have a very supportive fan and a very loyal fan base. And for them, traditional publishing does not make any financial sense because especially on Kindle, because they can immediately go to the next one and can immediately order the next release. So, would you consider going that route now, and how is your book doing? What was the feedback? How was the fan base? All of that.
Well, see, that's the other thing I'm finding where to actually market it at, because Ravish, which is my dark erotica, was published right before COVID. And
Mm,
it was like the worst timing on the planet, especially for a book like that. And I had just left the city and moved to the outer burbs, and I was taking care of my mother at the time. She wound up with cancer, so I literally had to put all of that on hold. All of a sudden, and then wham, here comes the pandemic. And so it's like, okay, nobody gets to do nothing. And that, this went on for like 2 or 3 years. So now I'm sort of getting back to it now. That's the only thing. It's sort of like a pause for about 2.5 years. And now I finally have
yeah,
the time to go back and do it. So right now I'm actually trying to explore those avenues to see where it can belong. And I'm totally for that. As long as people are reading it, that's great. But where that fan base is and all that, I would love to know. If there's anybody out there who knows where I could put this, to make it better. But and yeah, erotica was always a hard sell. Like I said, in America, it's just one of those last taboos.
is it? I mean, now, but now I think it's very popular. I mean, I see erotica authors all
Oh,
over the
now, yeah.
place,
Oh, yeah. Now,
and
but here,
now, yeah, yeah,
and especially
yeah.
for, like you said, self-publishing, and there definitely is a fan base. But yeah, I guess I'm still trying to find mine.
Yeah. Well, from what I read, is it's middle-aged women are the ones who are reading
Isn't that
erotica.
something? Yeah,
Uh,
I've heard that.
yeah, yeah, middle-aged, bored suburban woman. It's basically. I think it's maybe started with 50 Shades of Grey, and it kind of opened the
Oh,
door
sure.
for this, and it made it a bit mainstream. And I think it took from there. So like now I don't think there is any like taboo anymore as it used to be. You know, and I see people on Goodreads all the time. They read erotica. It's fine. I mean, it's. I don't think it's as a taboo as it used to be. I think thanks to 50 Shades of
Oh no,
Grey.
and I'm totally for it because I mean the subject matter for Ravish is pretty extreme, you know. So I'm curious about it, but yeah, it's you know I think finally you know that really kicked down the door and said, look, this is what we like to read, and I'm not going to be ashamed of it. And I love that. That's fantastic, and I think that you know you have to thank the internet for having that reach, you know, for having things readily available, Kindle and, you know, ebook and things like that. And I love that. You know, people can find more stuff, they can express themselves more. And people, you know, on all these social apps, they're finally saying, okay, this is what I like. That's it. You know, I love that. So it's always, even anything to do with the LGBT. I mean, growing up was, oh, no, don't talk about that. Now it's like, oh, yeah, no, I'm tired of it. I'm tired of being in the closet. I'm tired of, you know, being ashamed of that. So, and I love it. It's a great time to be an erotic writer. It's a great time.
Yeah, and there's a lot of LGBT erotica fiction now, and there's lots of diversity now, which is great. So, did you get any negative feedback? Because we authors, we get both positive and
Oh, yeah.
negative, and sometimes we have that negativity bias where we like latch on to negative feedback and it can like ruin our days. At least it happens to me.
No,
Like I would get 10 positive ones and one negative one, and I like, I won't be able to sleep. But so what was the negative that you got and how did you deal with that?
you know, it's funny. I was just telling a friend of mine about this because we were talking something about similar. And I said, you know, I've been getting this since the beginning. I remember in high school, even, believe it or not, in high school, I've always been writing. I've been writing since I was in the third grade. And when I wanted to write horror, you know, I think it started something like one of my teachers in high school just so happened to overlook over my shoulder and said, oh, you can't write things like that. And I'm like, I can't, you know, like that's very strange. You know, it's like, what did you read exactly? And, you know, she said, I don't understand why you would write something so gross or something so hideous or something spooky. Like, why would you write something beautiful? I said, well, to me, that is beautiful. I love the creepy crawlies at night. I love the boogeyman, you know, it's crazy. And, you know, at that time, I was very into wanting to break into screenplay writing and all that. And I was a huge fan of Jurassic Park when the original came out. And after seeing that, it's the first movie I've seen in the theater more than once. And I said, oh, that's it. I want to do this. This is great. This is a wonder, you know, so much fun. And, you know, I went to my student counselor and I said, I want to go into UCLA. And he kind of chuckled at me and he said, why? And I said, what do you mean why? I said, well, it's one of the great film schools. He said, you're not going to get in that. And it was just a blow. Like, what? And he said,
so supportive.
this is the school counselor, you know, guidance counselor. And I'm like, wow. And, you know, I had around that same time, I was sneaking out to the city on, you know, skipping school, but for a noble cause. Don't skip school, but for a noble cause. I would go see productions being made. I had a friend that worked in it, and he would always get me on set. And I was floored. I learned so much just watching. And of course, I got caught, you know. And, you know, the principal, he pulled me and my mom in the office and he looked right at me. He said, you know, there's no future. That's not a future. You know, that's just a fantasy. And I was like, are you kidding me? And, you know, and he says, you know, I hear you writing all these little stories and all that. He said, that's not good, son. That's not good. So from the beginning, you know, from people that was supposed to encourage me, you know, were knocking me down, you know, and telling me. So I think that, I mean, that really put a dent, you know, it really puts a dent in a young teenager's.
I bet.
And
Yeah.
it carried me for a long time. Like, what was I doing wrong? And looking back, I'm like, I wasn't doing anything wrong. You just didn't understand, you know? And so you have to take rejection. And I'm constantly have been getting rejections for short stories or screenplays. I mean, I got a folder full. I keep a little folder with a big frowny face on the cover of it. And that's my file. And it's like, you know, it's bigger than my book. But, you know, it's something that you have to deal with. So I've always had it from the beginning. You know, it's just, the thing is, there's always going to be someone that's going to tell you something. Oh, I don't like it. Oh, it's short. Oh, well, you know what? I don't care. You know,
Yeah, that's
There was
true. That's
in
true.
fact, around that same time, I had brought a script I wrote, and I needed to take it to a lawyer. And sure enough, I walked into this accountant's office, and I can't even imagine what this guy thought with this little 13-year-old with two scripts under his arms, walking into his office to ask him this question. And the secretary, I guess, was kind of amused. And he gave me some of the most interesting advice, and he was willing to hear what I had to say, and I love that. He said, Ryan, you can write about anything, and someone's going to hate it. He says, but I guarantee you there's going to be someone out there who's going to love it. Always stayed with me. He says, you can write about anything. You can write about making pies. It doesn't matter. Someone's going to read it, but there's also going to be someone that says, oh, I hate pies. So it's
Yeah, that's true. That's
I
true.
mean, you have to have the skin for it. I've talked to a lot of younger writers that are starting out, and they're like, oh, well, I don't know if anybody's going to like it. I'm like, who cares? There's going to be
Yeah,
10,000 that hate it, but then there's going to be 10,000 that love it. So, you have to kind of,
yeah,
rejection. That I think that's some of my earliest as far as that. And of course, I still get that kind of negativity, like, oh, this is stupid. Oh, this is too long. Oh, this is, doesn't make sense.
yeah. So, what does the future hold for you? What are your future plans?
I definitely want to move away from self-publishing. I'm definitely going toward looking for literary agents, and just so I can get like I said, I really have no background for it. It's not what I know. And I feel, and I don't mind doing a little marketing here and then. I certainly love to go out and do book signings and stuff like that. But to me, I feel like it intrudes on writing time. So I really want to go that route. And there's nothing wrong with self-publishing. I'm not saying that whatsoever. It's just not something I want to do anymore. I did it and it was great and I learned a lot, but I'm ready to go on to something a little different. I have 3 new books that I want to work on right now. I'm halfway through
Oh
the
well.
new one, and the other one I started. So there's 1, 2, 3. There's 4. There's 4 that I'm working on. Oh yes, there's a lot more coming from Ryan Winter, and you're gonna laugh, Natasha. They're all in different genres.
No, I'm not gonna laugh, but that's fun. What genre?
One of them is it's sort of sci-fi. I never, Ravish was I never meant to write gay characters. It's something I never wanted to. I am part of the community, but I never thought I'd be writing those characters, particularly in horror. But I kept thinking, I'm like, it's time now. It's time to to do horror and things
Yeah.
like that, gay lit. Because to me, gay lit, I've always read was just kind of these dopey melodramas, and this one trying to get this one kind of very bodice ripper type, stuff that I'm not. To me, that's a little silly for me, but I wanted to do something that's serious that had something to say. And this next book is like that. It's talking about the toxicity of dating on apps and things like that, but it has a sci-fi bend to it. So it's a little bit of a dark satire, I guess I would describe it. And then the book after that is sort of a young adult type book based in mythology. So there's different things, and I'm doing a sequel to Ravish as well. It's going to be a trilogy. So if you like it, there's more coming. Get ready.
Cool. So before we conclude, what are your top tips for upcoming authors, and especially if they wanna specialize in the horror and fantasy erotica genres?
To me, I wish somebody had told me this earlier. Be bold, be brave, do it. Don't let anyone tell you that it's wrong or that it's silly or anything like that. This is your dream. This is what you want to write. Write about it. And it goes back to what, this accountant had told me. He says, men, look, we always feel we're not up to it, or we're not talented enough, or we're not. No, anything can be learned. That's fine. Practice makes perfect. It's as simple as that. And when I started out, I worked with, I would copy styles of like King and all that just to get the rhythm going until I discovered my own. And you will. It's not impossible whatsoever. And if anything, research, read. I was in a creative writing class, and they were asking us why we wanted to be writers and what we were reading. And I remember this one lady in the back. She says, "Oh, I don't read." And I was like, "Whoa, wow!" And I'm like, "Wow, yeah, I can see who's not going to make this class." And to me, that was just really. It's like, you don't love stories, but you're writing stories. Like what? It was just like
Yeah.
a doctor that hated hospitals or blood. I'm like, what?
You're in the wrong field.
So, be brazen, be bold, go there. Never feel like, oh, I don't think people are going to get it. No, it doesn't matter. Someone will. You get it. It's your story. write your story. Always, there's going to be negativity. It's going to happen. Just prepare for it. It's what you want to write. And, writing's an old art, man, and it's beautiful, and it's going in different directions. And, don't let anybody hold you back on that. I've been told my whole life, quit. You need to quit. I get told that all the time. You need to quit. It's not paying off. I'm like, it always pays off. When I finish that book and I sit back, it has paid off. When I sit back and I look at it and I look back and go, wow, that's pretty good. It paid off.
Well, remember, I always remind myself, those who criticize you do less than you. So those people who are criticizing you, they've never published a book, probably.
Oh, yeah.
They don't know they don't know what it takes, like the tenacity, the discipline, all of that. I mean, it takes a certain character. Yeah.
Yeah. And, there's a lot of mentality and a lot of work that goes into it. But just because I'm not throwing down a hammer or putting on a uniform doesn't mean that I'm not working. And to me, that bugs me the most when people say, oh, well, you're not really working. I'm like, wow, boy, you don't know anything, do you?
You don't know.
It's a lot of work. So don't let nobody tell you that your work is not worth it. That's baloney. I don't buy that. If you have a book, I want to read it.
So Ryan, where can they find your books? On your website, on Amazon? How can they contact you for anyone who's listening or watching?
Yeah, absolutely. They're definitely on Amazon, all three of them. I have a Facebook page. It's Ryan Winter fan page. I prefer that one because I can interact with people a lot easier. I post all my podcasts, and right now I'm writing a blog about the history of Wake the Devil, which is based upon the Axeman murders of 1918. So what I'm doing right now is I'm going through the book and showing and explaining the real characters that what was going on, the victims of the Axeman, who he was, who they thought he was. So if you read the book and you're like wondering what the locales and the victims look like, I'm posting pictures as I go. Every couple of weeks I post another piece of it. So that's probably the best way to find me if you want to contact me there. And also have an Instagram, of course, at Ryan Winter Author. So I've been working on my website, but like I said, with the time and all, it's like, if I could get somewhere to do that for me, it would be so much easier, having to worry about that and having to go back and work again. But the Ryan Winter fan page on Facebook is probably the best way.
Cool. Well, thank you very much, Ryan. This has been amazing. Now you're inspiring me to write horror. So
do it.
I actually might write. I'm gonna maybe write a horror set in my hometown where I was born, in Amman, Jordan. I think that would be an interesting perspective.
Yeah.
And because people don't know much about it. Yeah.
If you're really trying to figure out an idea for horror, you always go back to your childhood and think about, God, what scared the crap out of me, and that's where a lot of that comes from. The Axeman.
I remember a story that everyone was talking about. I might kind of turn it into one. Well, yeah, thank you. You just inspired me.
All right, do it. I want to read it.
Sure. Well, thank you very much, Ryan, for joining us. And for anyone who's listening or watching, thank you very much for joining us today. And until we meet again. Thank you for tuning in to Read and Write with Natasha. I'm your host, Natasha Tynes. If today's episode inspired you in any way, please take the time to review the podcast. Remember to subscribe and share this podcast with fellow book lovers. Until next time, happy reading, happy writing.